Good evening. This week, more than perhaps ever before, our thoughts are on Asia, and we have the exceptional good fortune to have in the studio tonight one of Asia's most prominent statesmen, the Prime Minister of India. Mr. Nehru, I am extremely grateful to you for coming here, and I speak on behalf of us here and on behalf of the wider public who are watching us. I am particularly grateful as I believe this is your very first appearance on television.
Yes, this is the first time I am facing this ordeal. In fact, I know very little about television, except what I have heard about it.
Well, I would like to introduce to you, if I may, the people who are, I hope, going to make this not such a bad ordeal after all. Sitting on my left is Kingsley Martin, the editor of the New Statesman and Nation, and beyond him is H.V. Hodson, the editor of the Sunday Times, and at the end, to ask the first question, is Donald McLaughlin, the foreign editor of The Economist.
Prime Minister, when you return to India, people will be asking you what you thought of the coronation. What are you going to tell them?
Well, I'll have to tell them a great deal, but principally that it's very impressive in many ways. The most impressive thing to me was, apart from it being a great spectacle, were the crowds here and the way they behaved. And one begins to like more and more the London crowds and their fortitude in inclement weather and their insistence on enjoying themselves whatever might happen.
But is there going to be no criticism in India of your having come to the coronation?
There was when I came, and there will be no doubt when I go back. But I don't think it will amount to much.
Mr. Nehru, we all understand very well indeed why India decided to be a republic within the Commonwealth. What I think is a remarkable thing is why there is so little resentment in India towards the British in view of our past history. It seems to us that India is a most wonderfully magnanimous country. Can you explain this remarkable phenomenon of forgiveness?
Well, partly we don't, I suppose, hate for long or intensively. But chiefly, I think, because the background that Mr. Gandhi gave us during all these past decades.
After all, you were in prison yourself 16 years, and you don't seem to have any resentment about it at all. We might almost be popular people in India. Astonishing thing, really.
I think it's a good thing for a person to go to prison for a short while.
And to be Prime Minister for 7 years. I was going to ask, looking back on those 7 years and remembering all the hopes that were expressed at the time when India gained her independence, do you feel that they have been years of satisfactory achievement, or have you disappointments, Prime Minister?
Both. I think we have certainly achieved much, and there has also been a lack of achievement. We haven't done what we wanted to do, so it's both satisfactory and unsatisfactory.
Could you elaborate that a little? What have you been disappointed in?
That's rather a big question. There are so many things in India.
Can I give you a lead about democracy and the progress of political democracy in India?
Well, generally speaking, I would say that politically we had advanced. The unity of the country, we've put an end to all the old princely states. We've had these general elections which were remarkable on a tremendous scale, and we've built up a good democratic structure. What troubles us chiefly is the economic side. I believe we have made progress. I should like the progress to be much faster.
May I ask, Mr. Prime Minister, whether or not you consider that the economic progress has been fast enough to keep up with the very sharp increase in population? In other words, is there any possibility that India will be more or less self-sufficient in food in the course of time?
There's not only a possibility, but I should imagine a certainty, and not in the course of time, but in the near future, in the course of a year or two.
On the religious side, that's a very satisfactory, sounds to me an optimistic statement. But on the main trouble there's been in India, I'll put it this way, you have said in the past that you wanted to make India a secular democracy in which minorities could live at peace. Now, do you feel I regard that as one of your principal objectives. Do you feel that you have achieved that religious fanaticism is gone down now? Do you feel on top of that problem?
Well, we are on top of it, but I can't say that we've put an end to it. And we have to face it even now often enough. But the last elections showed that the Indian people generally don't like it.
And caste?
There's plenty of caste which interferes with politics in the sense of in elections a person may choose to vote for his caste man in that sense. They're still there, unfortunately. We try to fight it.
In view of all these circumstances, the caste divisions, the economic poverty of India, and the contrast between riches and poverty in India, isn't communism given a great opportunity there, and isn't it a real danger that it will seize the imagination and appeal to the people of India rather than Western democracy with its slow and elaborate forms?
When you talk about communism, well, you may mean many things. You may mean a vague communistic appeal, which has considerable effect. But if you talk about the Communist Party as such and its functioning, then it's a very limited appeal.
I think what we mean, Prime Minister, is that communism, by its ruthlessness and speed, produces economic results, so it seems, faster than the democratic system. Is that your view in India?
It may. It also produces might produce disruption and chaos. In fact, in order to achieve other results, it for the moment tries to create disruption.
Have the Indians who think about these matters not been impressed by what China's trying to do?
Oh, yes, they have been greatly impressed by China, by what has happened in China. Personally, I think that, although I admire much that has happened in China, I think we have done a good deal too, which might be admired in China.
You're satisfied that your methods are as good as the Chinese methods?
How can I compare them? They are different.
But that is
We
the
function on a
comparison
different plane.
that is the comparison which we're all expecting to be made in Asia.
Yes, the comparison will be made in regard to results achieved.
Is there then some sort of rivalry or between China and India for the leadership of Asia, those peoples outside the two countries in Southeast Asia?
Well, there's no sense of rivalry, nor any occasion for it. I do not know about the distant future.
Could one possibly put it this way? I think most people feel that the land problem is, after all, the big test issue, the thing that nationalism in Asia is going to hitch onto. And now the Chinese have solved that land problem very dramatically. Now, it seems to us that India, they solved it dramatically. I don't say well, but they solved it dramatically. Well, now, in India, people feel that India is slow on the land problem. Can you give us any lead on that?
That is perfectly true. We are slow, partly because of the democratic processes being slow, partly because our constitution, laying stress on individual rights and liberties, has been so interpreted by the courts that many of our legislative measures are hung up by the courts.
Apart from that, Prime Minister, would you say that the methods used in China are absolutely against the spirit of the Indian constitution and society as it now is?
Coercive methods, you mean?
Some methods no doubt are, but I can't say about all methods. I should imagine that the land problem there was solved without too much coercion, with a large measure of consent of the peasants concerned.
I tell you, Prime Minister, what I think is worrying many of us in a way about your democratic system, which is a matter of great admiration in this country, and that is that there doesn't seem to be an opposition, that there doesn't seem to be someone playing the leader of the opposition to you. And what do you feel, if I may ask an impertinent question, what do you feel will happen if you were to retire? Do you have a successor in Congress? Do you have a successor in the opposition?
Now, what do you mean by that there is no opposition? In our parliament, in the House of the People, there are 500 members, while we are 350. The opposition consists of 150. It is true that opposition is split up in 4 or more parties. There's no one major opposition. We haven't got the two-party system. We can't impose that. It develops or not.
Would you welcome it, Prime Minister?
Yes, on the whole, if there's a big enough party which thinks in terms of office, we'd welcome it. Because otherwise these opposition parties become totally irresponsible. They have no hope of office, so they can say and do just what they like. But there is an opposition, and a very good opposition, both in Parliament and outside. We have continually to face it.
If then, Prime Minister, you don't see any immediate danger from communism inside India, do you see any threat to India externally from communist pressure and expansionism, either immediately through Afghanistan, Tibet and so on, or through communist conquest, if you like, of Southeast Asia?
Whatever the internal position might or might not be, I see absolutely no danger, external danger to India from communist or any other source.
What about relations, there's no danger, what about relations with Pakistan? Are you more hopeful now of settling up difficulties? You've been seeing the Prime Minister of Pakistan from time to time, I believe, recently.
Yes. Yes. Our relations have improved greatly. Our psychological approach to each other is much better. And I think that we shall gradually solve most of our problems. It may take a little time to solve all of them, but I think we are on the right path.
But, Prime Minister, I think that what we were getting at a moment ago about the fear, a lot of us here have been afraid that if there is, as there now seems to be, a truce in Korea, that the Chinese may expand elsewhere. Not perhaps directly into India. The Himalayas are, except for a few climbers, a comparatively good barrier. But there is the danger that they might expand elsewhere in Southeast Asia and be a threat on your flank. Do you think that there is a danger of that sort, a danger of Chinese expansion down into China, Siam, and so Burma?
I think that is a wrong view completely. I don't think China, ever since its this changeover there, has had any desire to expand. They've got enough problems of their own. And so far as India is concerned, we have the most friendly relations with them.
What about Korea, though? That seemed expansionist to some of us.
Well, till the 48th parallel was crossed in Korea, there was no sign of Chinese activity. It was only after that was crossed. And China, I have no doubt, feared invasion of its own mainland. And they told us so when it was on the point of being crossed, that now we are threatened all round. Remember, there are plenty of people saying, let us invade China and put an end to the people's government there. So in sheer fear, I think they reacted. And once they reacted, well, of course, they got entangled in it.
Prime Minister, isn't there a danger in these countries of Southeast Asia from the from the Chinese policy of regarding Chinese abroad as still their own citizens and not encouraging them or even allowing them to become full-blooded citizens of, let us say, Malaya?
Yes, perhaps there is, but that's nothing to do with policy. It's the innate Chinese characteristic which survives wherever they go, which is more important.
Do I understand you're right, Prime Minister, that what you regard as the big thing in Asia, and for that matter now in Africa, is the growth of a great national feeling, and that, as I understand, interpret speeches of yours, what you think is important is the growth of this national feeling and the fear that communism will make use of that. Would you say something about that?
Well, you see, I think in the perspective of history, one of the biggest things that has happened and is happening is this awakening or upsurge in Asia and to some extent in Africa. It's a tremendous thing. It takes different, it develops differently in different parts of Asia. But it has upset completely the old order. In China it has gone one way, in India another way. We arrived at a peaceful settlement with Britain. In Burma, it's Southeast Asia, everywhere it has a different face. But the main thing is this enormous upsurge. In a sense, after 300 or 400 years of, well, more or less European domination, Asia is coming into its own, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly.
Mhm.
And one has to understand that, appreciate it, understand it, and not merely get angry at it or dislike it. Of course, to some extent, in a different way, the same applies to Africa.
Do you think, Prime Minister, that the Europeans are understanding in Africa what is taking place, or are they liable to make the same mistakes that have been made in Asia over the last, as you say, 300 years?
I'm afraid they're actually making those mistakes. It's not a question of being liable to make mistakes. I think Africa, please remember, is a continent which has, it's the most tragic continent. For hundreds and hundreds of years, people of Africa have suffered terribly. Maybe they are not so developed as others because they've not had the opportunity. Given the opportunity, no doubt they would. And I'm deeply distressed at what is happening in Africa, whether in the north or east or west. In fact, the only bright spot in Africa, if I may say so, is the Gold Coast and partly Nigeria.
But you're not suggesting, Prime Minister, are you, that there is one solution and one criticism to be made about all parts of Africa? Isn't the problem different in something like a dozen parts of that continent?
The problem is different, but the approach is the same, if an approach friendly and sympathetic to the Africans.
But isn't there a direct contrast between those countries like the Gold Coast and Nigeria, where Europeans do not make their permanent homes, and countries like the Union of South Africa, Southern Rhodesia, and Kenya, where there is not only a settled European community, but people who have, and have had for generations, no other home?
Of course the problems are different, but however many Europeans may live there, they're outnumbered tremendously by the African population. Either they cooperate, live in some kind of cooperation, or they try to suppress each other. If the Europeans try to suppress the Africans, undoubtedly a day will come the Africans will suppress the Europeans and push them out, because they outnumber them so much.
But Prime Minister, this raises a difficult problem. At the United Nations, I think it's right to say, India and other Asian nations have from time to time expressed very strong views about British and other European policies in Africa. Do you think by doing that you assist race relations or make them more bitter?
Well, I don't remember that we have said much about British policies in Africa. We have said a great deal, in the United Nations I mean, we have said a great deal about the situation in South Africa.
And in North Africa, in French North Africa.
Yes, and in Morocco and
you-
Tunisia.
Do you think that helps the French to solve their problems with the Africans?
That's a curious question.
The French don't think so.
Well, I think it's a curious question. My being told that you must not say anything when evil is happening, lest the evil may become worse.
But
I think, as a matter of fact, since by some circumstance I became Prime Minister of India, I have to hold myself in check all the time as to what I say. Otherwise I'd shout out from the housetops what is happening all over the world and in Africa, north, south and east. I wouldn't remain as quiet as I do now.
You feel a difference, don't you, Prime Minister, in what you can say about countries in which there are Indians and others? It seems to me there's a slight difference in your status in relation to countries where there are Indians.
You mean in Africa?
Well, I was thinking of Kenya, for instance, and the Kenya situation, where there are twice as many Indians as there are Europeans.
Well, yes. What we have told the Indians there, year after year, is that they must cooperate with the Africans, they must not exploit them or take advantage of them, and we will not support them in their demand for any privilege which goes against the Africans. They said, if you can't get on with the Africans, you'll have to get out of Africa. That's what we have told our Indians.
But inside the Commonwealth conference and so on, you don't discuss or deal much with the South African situation. You regard that as a matter for the United Nations rather than the Commonwealth, do you?
Or direct dealing between the two
Or direct
countries
relations.
concerned.
Prime Minister, I wonder if that raises a point I'd like to ask you about. What role do you see for the Commonwealth in the world today? We've spoken about the United Nations and we've spoken about India's role in Asia and in the world. What role do you see for the Commonwealth, coming as you are straight from Commonwealth Conference?
I think this development of the Commonwealth is of great significance. I can't say yet what future form or shape or importance it may have. This kind of free association of people with countries with different interests, different outlooks, yet meeting together and in a friendly way trying to understand each other is a very great thing. And that is why I would not like to bring up any questions there which first of all changes its role, makes it into a kind of super state. Secondly, which almost might break it up.
There is a very vital question, Prime Minister, if you'll forgive me returning to
Yes.
what I asked you just now. You spoke very eloquently of the right of the Indian Prime Minister to express a moral view of what is happening in other countries.
But I said something else. I said, as Prime Minister, I don't. I have to restrain myself. I said, if I'm not Prime Minister, I would do it.
I beg your pardon, but that doesn't lead on to my question.
All right.
Do you think that within the Commonwealth, individual members should express views about the internal affairs of others publicly? Is that healthy or not, in your
You're
opinion?
talking about members of government, or
Members of government, yes.
well, normally speaking, members of government should not. But it's very difficult to draw a line like that. Take the question of South Africa, which we have publicly raised in the United Nations. The United Nations has passed resolutions proposed by us, and the South African government has repudiated and bypassed those resolutions. Now, are we to remain silent about that? Obviously, we have to say something. You see, when courtesy and drawing room manners are very good, but when a fire is raging, you can't be function as if you were in a drawing room. When a grave danger threatens the world, it's not a question of individuals being concerned. When some policy is being pursued which may endanger the whole of Asia and Africa, then it may become a very wrong thing to remain completely silent about it. Though one does, as Prime Minister. If I was not Prime Minister, I wouldn't be silent.
I understand.
I wonder if I could ask what the Americans, I think, would call a $60 question.
64.
A $64 question, I apologize. Has the Prime Minister any view about whether Russian policy, Russian attitude to the rest of the world has really changed? How does he interpret recent changes in Russian internal and external policy? Or is that too difficult a question to
Well,
ask?
it is difficult in the sense that one cannot say anything definite. But my own view, and very definite view, is that there has been a change, a marked change, and that Russia definitely desires, shall I say, peace, for whatever period it might be. I can't say forever.
You don't suggest that they've abandoned the ideal of world revolution and the communist supremacy
No.
over the whole world?
I can't say, but I would put it this way, that their ideal of a world revolution, they might think will be furthered much more by their showing internal results in Russia than by indulging in an adventure which may lead to war and upset everything.
And on that basis, you might be hopeful of some results from big power conference. I don't say four power, but big power conference.
I certainly think that the time is ripe for such a conference and that it should lead to results.
Do you
Prime
think
Minister,
the-
a four-power conference could hardly tackle the questions of Asia adequately without the presence of governments like India, could it? Later.
Asia meaning the Far East?
The Far East and Central Asia.
Central Asia, what do you
Southern
mean?
Asia, I beg your pardon.
Southern Asia, yes. Well, that's true. Asia will have to be represented there, and the Asian countries concerned.
So after a four-power conference, you would expect something larger in which India might take part.
Or would you regard the United Nations machinery as being adequate once the will to use it were present?
Don't know. The United Nations has undergone considerable transformation. And as you know, people argue as to whether it can continue in its present form or not. It started as a universal body to which every country could belong, every independent country. Now, some of the biggest and independent countries are not allowed in it, which seems to me completely opposed to the very conception of the United Nations, China not being in it, for instance. Not a question of liking China, the Chinese people's government or not. It's a question of recognizing fact and reality. If you don't, Well, it's the United Nations that suffers, not China very much.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think it will be possible then to bring China in, perhaps after the truce in Korea? And what stands in the way now? I would have thought very little.
I hope it will be possible, and I believe that the pressure of events will bring that about. It may take some time, not immediately after the truce.
If you were to be present at the Bermuda conference, what do you think should be pressed on Mr. Eisenhower? The admission of China, what sort of a settlement do you see as at all possible in the Far East, which must be one of the subjects discussed at Bermuda?
Surely you don't expect me to say what I would expect to happen at Bermuda, except that then or later the question of China coming into the United Nations has to be raised. In fact, it is odd, is it not, that say in these Korean truce negotiations or in the political conference to follow, China is bound to be there. There is China, there is the USA, there is the UK, there are other countries. They meet to consider problems. What more recognition is there when dealing with major problems in this way? And it seems odd after that to say, no, we won't allow you to talk about other matters or come into the United Nations.
Would you agree, Prime Minister, that Anglo-American, British Commonwealth American, if you like, agreement and concord have a very special value for the defense of our common ideals of democracy?
Yes, certainly.
And that to aim for that has a value of its own, and that it may require sometimes some compromises from our side with policies that we don't see 100% eye to eye with on the other side of the Atlantic.
But Mr. Hodgson, politicians are always compromising. They have to. But there is a tendency, if I may say so, for leading statesmen in Europe and America to look at the world from Europe and America. Well, if we look at the same world with the same principles from, let us say, Delhi or some place or Karachi, well, the world looks slightly different. Geography counts. Take the question of China. China is a distant country to most people in Europe and America. China is a country having a 2,000-mile frontier with India. Well, it's a different picture to us immediately.
Well, I certainly agree that your contribution from Asia is an invaluable one. I just wanted to suggest
that is what I say. That is the value, one of the significant features of the Commonwealth conferences, that these different viewpoints come up, maybe if you like slightly clash, but in a friendly way, I mean, and lead to a better understanding.
Prime Minister, you've had one problem for some years which has tested the ability to compromise. May I ask whether the assistance of the United Nations in the difficulties between Pakistan and India have on the whole been helpful?
I'm afraid not.
The United Nations has not helped.
It has not proved helpful with all the best will in the world. I think because in the nature of things these problems are more easily dealt with directly than through third parties.
Isn't it in that case partly due to the fact that both sides in the beginning of the Kashmir dispute, so to speak, staked out a legal claim for the whole of the prize, and that neither really believed that they could ever have the whole? That's to say, the situation is actually to some extent a fait accompli with Pakistan in the north and Jammu in Indian hands. There must be some sort of a compromise, mustn't there?
But you must remember, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
But you must remember that the initial reason for its going to the United Nations was a very simple issue.
Yes.
That is Pakistan's invasion. That was the issue. I accept what you say, that the if you look at the question as a whole, it is a complicated issue
Yeah.
and not easily disposed of by a simple formula.
Therefore not good for legal discussions, what I meant
Quite so.
in the United Nations.
That, I'm afraid, is all that we have time for now tonight, Mr. Nehru. I would like to thank you on behalf of ourselves and of the public, both for the questions you've answered as Prime Minister and also a few asides from Mr. Pandit Nehru. And I would like to thank you very much indeed and to welcome you to England at any time you come and any time you wish to address us again on television. Thank you.
Thank you. I haven't found this last half hour quite so bad as I expected it to be. In fact, it has passed rather rapidly. I was surprised that it was over. Perhaps because your questions were interesting and I got involved in them. Anyhow, it has been a pleasant time, and I thank you for it. And I wish those who may listen to this later on good night.